The best of money matters. Wealth Tracker.
Welcome to the Wealth Tracker, where we dive into the uncharted territories of niche investment strategies that promise to redefine wealth. Hello, I'm Hongbin Jeong. Southeast Asia is fast emerging as one of the world's most exciting startup hubs, fueled by strong economic fundamentals and a digitally savvy population. Yet beneath the surface of innovation and rapid growth lies a critical challenge: governance. As geopolitical tensions and shifting regulations reshape capital flows, investors are becoming more cautious. Institutional capital, in particular, is scrutinizing governance practices closely, looking beyond product market fit to the underlying structures of trust, compliance, and oversight. So what are the key governance blind spots holding back Southeast Asia's startups from attracting deeper institutional investment? How can startups build governance frameworks that protect investors without creating unnecessary bureaucracy? Well, to find out more, joining me now is Jecky Pelaez, who is the partner for investments of legal and compliance at Kickstart Ventures. Hi, Jecky. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Hongbin. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
All right. Well, Jecky, just to start off, what are the most common governance issues you see in Southeast Asia startups that give investors a pause?
Great question, Hongbin. I think governance challenges in Southeast Asia, they're not too dissimilar from what we see globally, right? It's not like Southeast Asia is the only one suffering from governance challenges. But that being said, some of the challenges that we see in Southeast Asia, and particularly to Southeast Asia, is that given that Southeast Asia is so fragmented in terms of its geography, the countries involved, different jurisdictions, that poses a challenge to startups and investors, because understanding all these compliance and governance requirements for each jurisdiction becomes a challenge. So like if you're probably an investor in the Philippines, I probably am not too familiar with, let's say, with compliance or regulatory frameworks in Thailand, right? So that's one example. The other thing is probably also sometimes a lack of general understanding of both the need for compliance and governance by founders. Sometimes founders will just look at governance and think it's a compliance checklist that they have to tick the box and then it's done, right? But governance is also like a frame of mind that you have to proactively keep on doing alongside with the rest of the operations of your business.
Okay. So how do missing shareholder resolutions or delayed regulatory filings impact investors' confidence in a startup's management team?
Yeah. Well, delayed regulatory filings or missing shareholder resolutions, right? Like they indicate a lack of governance or oversight or, ability to comply with, say, mandatory filings, right? So because of that, then it could signal that there are operational inefficiencies. Maybe something is perhaps being hidden or not being fully disclosed. And so the challenge there becomes like how long it takes to do diligence in a certain company. As an investor, since we have to run our diligence, we want to have all the information available. And if the information is not available, then the whole entire process takes longer. Then you have to ask more questions. And sometimes if the questions aren't answered or they're unable to give that, then it gives investors pause on whether this would be a worthy investment.
Are there recurring red flags in Southeast Asia startups' governance practices that you think the broader ecosystem overlooks then?
Good question. I wouldn't say that they are recurring red flags,
Okay.
right? But I would like to think that it's more of, sometimes it's the lack of building in the good governance practices into the corporation. It's not to say that, the Southeast Asia does not have this, right? There are those that do it really well, but, every now and then a story comes up that leads to poor governance practices, right? So you see this, like sometimes the information is not given, when you have boards, and especially in Southeast Asia, right? Sometimes our culture is not very confrontational. So when boards convene and they discuss matters, sometimes it's very hard to express problems or issues with one another, and then you sort of skirt the issue and try to say it in quote unquote nicer ways, but instead of just being upfront and telling them hey, this is the problem, these are the issues. So sometimes there's that, right? So those are the things that we sort of see that could probably help move governance practice to be improved on.
Okay. So how important is the alignment of governance standards across Southeast Asia in attracting more, foreign institutional investment?
I think it's quite important that because, like I said, right, Southeast Asia is rather fragmented, and so it would be near impossible to have like a certain standard for like all countries, right? Because you have to contend with different laws, jurisdictions, cultural practices, business practices in each country, right? But if there's some sort of alignment or like framework with how certain governance mechanics work, let's say like certain like when you want to vote, how do boards vote, how do shareholders vote, or if somebody wants to bring up an issue, whistleblower issues, right? How can you build in those practices? Because there is a way to get best practices and align those best practices across the region and still keep it in line with the different requirements of each country's laws and practices.
Okay, so what practical steps can governments or industry bodies take to, reduce friction for cross-border investors?
I think I mentioned earlier about getting the best practices from each country when it comes to good governance practices, right? And aligning both the public and the private sector on what these best practices are, right? Lately, there's been a lot of active push from the public sector in Southeast Asia, and they're starting to understand the role of startups and the importance of what they bring to the economy, the community, and society. So there is interest on their side, right? But given that startups are in different stages, like there are startups where you're just like 3 people deep, just starting out, and then there are startups where you reach your Series B, you're probably like more than 100 employees generating millions of dollars already, right? But it's knowledge sharing between the public and the private sector, and the public sector understanding that, okay, these are the challenges that we face when it comes to governance. How can we better align government institutions to understand the needs and challenges of startups and investors and founders?
Right. Well, then how can startups embed robust governance frameworks early on without, stifling their agility or innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, right? Startups run the gamut in terms of like stage, life cycle. You could be a very small startup just starting out with like one customer versus like another startup that has 1,000 customers across the region. But it's always best to start early, and for founders to get into the mindset that governance is not it's not reactive, but it's proactive, and that you consistently have to check it, improve on it as you mature, because your governance needs when you first start out will be radically different from when you start to scale and grow. So it's understanding that mindset and knowing that, reaching out to experts and seeking advice from people in advisors, mentors, lawyers, accountants, people in the industry, former founders that have done it, on what would these best governance practices would be, and tailoring it to the stage of the company, and the needs of that corporation at that time.
Okay, so what role should founders play in balancing governance requirements with maintaining operational freedom?
That's a really good question, Hongbin. I think the most important thing that founders should play in balancing governance requirements is really to keep founder integrity as central as possible in what they're doing, like in all their operations, right? So it's really leading by example as to, okay, for example, like this quarter's sales were not so good. Then I should be able to be open and transparent to my board and tell them, like, this is what happened. This is why it happened. What are we going to do about it? Can you help me? Or this is the help that I need. Because keeping that culture of openness and transparency and keeping those lines of communication open will always do more good than harm. So, like, one of the things that we like to do here at Kickstart Ventures, like when we work with founders, We try to build in a regular cadence of check-ins. If we don't sit in the board, we'll build in either a monthly, quarterly cadence depending on the needs of the corporation. And then that's when they're able to share with us like what are they going through, what are their challenges. So it's like little things like that even if you're an early stage startup, you can already build that practice in where you're able to communicate, seek advice, and actually share details about operations. On the flip side, like investors, like when this data is presented to them, like they ask the questions, they can dig deeper as well, and then they can verify this data and hopefully give advice that would help these founders get to the next stage or like improve.
So how has the role of VCs then evolved beyond capital provision into governance, oversight, and risk mitigation?
Yeah, I do think that VCs have always been a little bit more involved beyond capital provision. I think like VCs, when startups seek investor funding from VCs, it's not really only the capital that you ask for, but it's really their ability to help you in other ways. Like whether it's through portfolio development, giving advice on how to optimize your operations. So back to your questions though, VCs evolve. We are incentivized to promote good governance as well, right? Because it just makes the company like run more smoothly. So let's say I come in at Series A and we're able to build in good governance practice, good reporting practices. Once you get to Series B, the new investor there can see that, then this company has a good track record of governance. It has a good track record of sharing information to its shareholders, its board of directors, its stakeholders. It regularly checks in with everyone, and I have all the information that I need to be able to make a good investment. So that's like really the role of VCs and like shepherding them to like good governance practices.
Well, overall, Jecky, before we let you go here, what are the biggest opportunities and risks for investors who, prioritize governance in this region?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity in prioritizing governance really is it really promotes investor confidence, right? Having better governance practices in your startup helps you attract better investors. It helps investors make better calls or give better advice on your business because you're being transparent with them. You're actually telling them like, this is where we're not doing so good. This is where we are doing well. So that's really the opportunity there. It really helps promote investor confidence. And in a way, it also sets up the company for more long-term gain because it's building in a practice very early on that is sustainable to the future. The risk obviously is because of our diverse regulatory environment. It's difficult to align all these standards or these governance, what these best practice governance should be, right? Like if I'm sitting here in the Philippines, can I truly get all the best practices here, or how do we fit it to the Philippine setting or Indonesian setting or a Malaysian setting? I mean, that is a risk, but of course it's a risk that can be mitigated. And of course the real risk is it just really slows down deals.
Right.
It really slows down deals because diligence will just take longer, more questions are asked, deals could fall through because questions are not answered, and then deal confidence erodes, and then people just don't want to do business.
Definitely. Well, some great insights from you there, Jecky. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was Jecky Pelaez, who is a partner for investments of legal and compliance at Kickstart Ventures. This has been the Wealth Tracker with me, Hongbin Jeong.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.